My Story of Mice and Men was a little bit confusing because the name didn't really match this book as much as I thought it would be. My story is also about two men who are traveling together to try and find work when life takes a wild turn and ends a whole different way no one would have thought of. The two main characters are Lenny and George in my story, but there's also Curly and Curly's wife who are an important role. Lenny is a big man who is messed up in the head or maybe retarded, but the book never said exactly what's wrong with him. He is said to be very strong, and his strengths help him out in times, but also puts him in bad situations in the end of the book. George is the other man who travels around with Lenny all the time, and he's like a brother to him. He keeps him out of trouble or keeps him safe, tells him what to do and tells him what not to do. It was very surprising to see what George did to Lenny, because I thought they were very close, and I never thought that would happen. Even if there was no other outlook, he still decided to do what he did. Curly works at the farm where George and Lenny get a job. He is not the tallest man, he's pretty short. He's also the boss's son, and he likes to get in tussles with big guys like Lenny. And Curly's wife, she had admitted to Lenny that she doesn't even like Curly, and she's always super bored, so she tries talking to them, but George always tells Lenny to keep away from her because she will cause trouble. In the end, she ends up getting killed in a way no one would have thought of either, and if Lenny would have listened to George, she would have never have died. The story takes place during the late 1800s or 1900s, or during the Depression era, like my last story. I believe it is said that the farm is a couple miles away from the city of Soledad in California, and they also tend to sleep on the farm in a cabin where a lot of the action happens in the story. The crisis is probably when Lenny meets Curly and his wife. I say this because without them the entire story would have never have happened. George and Lenny also have a dream of buying some land and living off the fat of the land. That's the only thing that Lenny cares about, so that can also get in the way of some of his thinking, because he never really thinks much. The conflict in my stories is always going to be man versus man, or it could be man versus survival, because back then all they did was try to survive and not die. And man versus man, because Lenny has to try and defend himself against Curly, because one night he got in a fight with him, but ended up squishing Curly's hand almost basically off. The climax is one night Lenny was out in the barn with Slim's pups that he had with his dogs, and he was just petting them, and Curly's wife came in and had a conversation with him, and after a little bit of talk and how Lenny said he likes soft things, she let him sort of pet her hair, and since Lenny likes soft things, he never let go. So she started screaming and shaking, and he just kept on holding on to her, and then he started shaking and tell her to be quiet or else George won't let him tend the bunnies at the future farm. And he shook so hard that he ended up breaking her neck, and she was dead from there. And now that he was in trouble, he knew where to go, which was basically to run to a spot where George told him to go if any trouble had happened, so that's exactly what he did. The resolution is when the men found the body in the barn and decided to go after Lenny once they found out he was the one who killed her. George went looking for him too, and he found him first because he knew where to look and where he was in the spot. Lenny was only worried about the future farm, so he asked George to tell him the story about the farm. And he told the story about 4 or 5 times in the story, so Lenny is obsessed with this dream of his. George said to turn around and imagine like he saw it in the field when he turned around. And after a short way into his story, George took out a gun and shot him straight in the back of the head. I would have never have thought this because I thought they could have possibly ran away, but I have no idea why he did that. And then after that, he went off with Slim, and they had a drink. So it's very confusing. Character development happened a little bit with George because he had to make the decision to kill his best friend, and I think he did it because he didn't want others to do worse to him, because I think if Curly got him, he would have tortured him or anything like that, because I was his wife. Lenny could only remember a few things, so his character was never going to change at all. And this is something I've never really experienced in a book who had absolutely no character development at all. Not much symbolism, but a good one that I found would be the farm that they wanted to own in the future. They never get it, and a character in the story, Crook, said that most people would never get it because many people inspire to own their own land. I think the farm symbolizes all the stuff that we want or the stuff that we can't get in the future that we won't get. I don't know if this is symbolism either, but when Lenny was hiding in the Brussels waiting for George to find him, he saw his aunt and a big bunny talk to him, and I don't know what that means, but it has to symbolize something. A theme I found in my book would do as what you're told if it's the right thing. George told Lenny to stay away from Curly's wife because she could cause trouble, and she clearly caused Lenny to have trouble with her. He killed her. If only he would have stayed away, they probably would have gotten their farm, and then their life would be happy. To conclude, I was really confused about the ending of the story with Lenny's hallucination, but I think it was a good thing what the writer did, because that's what good writers do. They're supposed to confuse the reader, if I'm thinking right. I think the book could have been a little bit longer, but besides that, it was a quick read, and I would definitely recommend to read it sometimes, besides a few slow parts in the book. That was my book report of Mice and Men. I hope you enjoyed.